Hello and welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I am Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and today we are talking about tourism, and we're very excited about that. We're also talking about outdoor recreation this week, and we have with us Director of Outdoor Industry Association's Sustainability Working Group, Beth Jensen, and we also have Manager of Chemicals Management within the Sustainability Group, Jessie Curry. Welcome, ladies. How are you today?
We're good. Thank you, Alex.
Yes, thank you. So I am going to go ahead and throw this to Beth and just give me a little bit of your background and how you ended up at OIA, excuse me.
Sure thing. Yeah. So, I got my start really in the natural products industry, working on sustainability of products there and some of the early days of the natural and organic food movement. And then I did my MBA up at CU Boulder and really started to make some connections into the outdoor industry at that point. I think there's a lot of parallels between natural products and outdoor, and a lot of what I was doing previously in the natural products industry really translated well into the outdoor industry, which I believe has a very similar ethos in many ways. The people that are going into both of these industries aren't necessarily doing so to get rich, although that's a nice side effect. I think if that happens, I think for the most part they're following their passion in both of these industries, and so that's what really drew me to the outdoor industry, and was fortunate to get some opportunities actually with Outdoor Industry Association to work with OIA on a couple of projects while I was a student in business school there at CU, and then ended up becoming the first full-time employee focused solely on sustainability for OIA when I graduated in June of 2010, and I've been here leading this department ever since.
Wonderful. That's awesome. So, Jessie, do you want to give us a little bit of your background and how you ended up?
Sure. Yeah. My background is a little different, but yeah, we ended up both at OIA, and I actually studied fashion design as a student in Oregon. And then once I started learning about the global production supply chain, that's used to actually make the products, I got really interested. And so I had also gotten into the food industry in the meantime, and was interested in kind of local food systems and sustainability in the food industry for a little bit, kind of during my break. And then I stepped back into apparel and knew I wanted to work for OIA because a lot of the environmental indexing for products, specifically for apparel, had been started at OIA, and so they've been known as a leader in this space for a long time. So had kind of set my sights on them once I had learned about them as a fashion design student.
Fantastic. I love that. So, Beth or Jessie, do you want to give me a little bit of background of what exactly the OIA Sustainability Working Group is?
Yeah, sure thing. And one note I'll just make on both of our backgrounds. I think as I get asked by many students or others just looking to crack into this field of sustainability in the outdoor industry, it's pretty apparent that there's no one traditional path into this work. I think the folks that we work with out in all of these outdoor companies across the country and really across the world come from all different backgrounds, whether it's fashion design or product design and development, or whether it's marketing, or whether it's supply chain or engineering, or all sorts of different backgrounds. I think it's pretty interesting in that regard that there's not really a traditional educational or a professional path like there is in many other fields. But yeah, segueing into a bit about what we do. So, the Sustainability Working Group was really started over 10 years ago now by members of the industry. It was actually a gentleman from REI and a woman from Timberland, and they kind of wrangled some of their colleagues who they knew were sort of thinking more proactively about sustainability in the outdoor industry. And there were a number of factors at play at the time. This was 2006, 2007 type of time frame. A number of outdoor companies were at that time trying to develop their own standards or labeling systems for sustainability of their products. So, you had one company looking at a 4 out of 5 stars type of system. Timberland had just come out with its own green index, they called it, which was on a scale of X number out of 10. They were ranking their sustainability, the sustainability of their products. REI was looking at a system. The North Face, I know, was looking at a system. And so we had all these different companies were trying to think through how to more effectively talk to consumers about the different sustainability attributes of their products, as well as of their brands and of the factories in which these products are made and so forth. I think the other interesting piece of context that was happening at that time was that a number of the leading brands were starting to conduct what we would call a life cycle assessment on all of the different operational functions of their businesses. There's a lot of focus at that time about sort of recycling at the corporate office and, travel and so forth. And those things are all, important. We certainly don't want to detract from the importance of those things. But the interesting finding was that the data was showing that about 2/3 of impacts across the board, in multiple different companies who are conducting these types of assessments, 2/3 of impacts were coming in the supply chain. So in the manufacturing of the materials and the products that they were making. And so that was really an eye-opener for our industry to say, you know what, we really, obviously, again, we certainly want to do what we can at our home offices and in our operations and, encourage carpooling and riding your bike to work and all of those sorts of things. But really, the big impacts are happening in our interconnected global supply chains around the world. And that was really the impetus to sort of convene the industry together, and some of the industry leaders together back in, as I said, 2007. It was actually the first meeting was at Outdoor Retailer Winter Market, which was in Salt Lake City at the time in 2007, January of 2007. And the industry leaders got together and said, let's start to think about, coming together, even though we're competitors, as many of our brands are, let's come together and decide what best practices are in the supply chain and create an index that we can all reference, a common language and framework to benchmark and measure the sustainability of our products and brands and factories in the outdoor industry. And from there, this tool that was then called the Eco Index was born, which Jesse mentioned earlier. That's now today evolved into something called the HIG Index that's being managed by a much broader group of, not only outdoor brands are still part of this group and helping manage the HIG Index, but, broader global fashion and sport brands like Nike and Adidas and Levi's and Gap and H&M and all of these other global fashion brands, knowing that we all share the same supply chains globally, and so we need to have a consistent way to talk about sustainability and to assess what's happening in factories and what's happening in brands and so forth. So in this tool, again, it's called the HIG Index, HIGG Index, is now being globally adopted, and the estimate is around 50% of the global supply chain of apparel and footwear is now adopting this tool, and more joining every day. So it's really, it really got its start in the outdoor industry, but it's now being managed by this broader group. And the broader group that manages it now is called the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. So OIA partners quite closely with them to continue, building this index. And really our focus now is adopting it broadly throughout the outdoor sector.
That's fascinating. I really enjoy learning about that. I actually, right in front of me, I printed out a lot of what the Sustainability Working Group does, which I know is terrible for the environment, and I am sorry about that I did print it out instead of leaving it on my laptop.
That's okay. That's all right.
But I just want to reiterate for our listeners out there, so sustainability, when we're talking about this Outdoor Industry Association, is not just sustainability with your clothes. It's the sustainability throughout the entire process of the products that you get at the store, right?
That's right. That's right. And so a couple things on that. I think, so the outdoor industry, I know you sort of teed up this session with talking about, recreation and tourism. And, we certainly, as the trade association for the outdoor industry, we have 1,300 member companies. We are one of the primary representatives for the aggregate industry in Washington, D.C. and at the state level in terms of policy. And so, we certainly promote, protection of outdoor places to recreate and trade issues that benefit the industry and so forth. But when we talk about sustainability, when Jesse and I talk about sustainability in the outdoor industry, we're really speaking directly about what we would call impacts in the supply chain. So again, going all the way back to how are the materials manufactured? Where are the materials coming from? Whether it's cotton or polyester in a garment, or whether it's aluminum or carbon fiber in a bicycle frame, for example, or whether it's leather in a piece in some footwear that you might be buying, maybe some leather hiking boots. All of those things, that's where it starts. Is really how are the materials being sourced and manufactured, and then going all the way through the production process. How are the materials, which materials are being chosen, and then how are they being combined to make the product? What are the manufacturing processes that are being used? How are the workers being treated who are assembling those products, or making the fabric, or whatever the case may be? And then how are those products transported to where they're ultimately sold? And then what happens to those products at the end of their useful life? Those are all considerations that we're talking about when we talk about sustainability of products, brands, and factories in the outdoor industry. So it can be a quite broad definition. I think we're looking at both environmental and social impacts. I think there's certainly some of it comes into play, as I mentioned earlier, with our government affairs team and sort of making sure that we're protecting these broader places to recreate. But yeah, we're really focused specifically on the supply chain when we look at our work.
Absolutely. Well, and if you're utilizing all the resources to build the outdoor, apparel that you're wearing, then you're going to ruin the outdoors that you're trying to see in that apparel, right? That's
exactly, and it's a connection that's not often made, I think, and that's one reason, one thing Jesse and I are really trying to push more externally is this connection, this intrinsic link between, how outdoor products are made and making sure that that is part of the consideration. There's been so much focus, particularly here in Colorado in the last year or so on, here in Colorado and Utah, I should say, on, outdoor recreation and, the sort of impact that the outdoor recreation industry has on, protection of public lands. And, there was obviously our very public move of the Outdoor Retailer Trade Show from Utah to Colorado, in sort of protest of some of the public lands policies that have been in place in Utah. And so that has gotten quite a bit of attention over the course of the last, really several years, but the last year in particular. Our end of this is something that we feel like doesn't necessarily get connected as much, or hasn't to date, which is, as a consumer, of course you're thinking about where you're recreating and the sort of the policy end of that, and making sure that those outdoor recreation areas get protected. But when you're buying garments, a jacket or a pair of hiking boots, again, or a pack that you're going to use on the hiking trail, are you making choices about, or are you even thinking about how those products might have been made and the impact that they might have had, not only on the environment, but on the communities where they were manufactured, and the people that were that we're manufacturing them. So these are all the considerations that we're trying to sort of open folks' eyes to more broadly.
Well, and I love that, right? It's touching on everything from the minute that there's a thought in the fashion of what you're going to wear in this apparel until it's brought to you on a shelf. You guys are looking at all of that to make sure that it is sustainable, that it's staying green, that everyone that's working at those companies is properly compensated. And I think you guys have a great mission here. I'm here for it.
And it's something we feel like should be built into the outdoor industry, and it's not something I think that is always found at a trade association. I think trade associations have a somewhat bad reputation for sort of addressing the lowest common denominator, so to speak, amongst all of their members, their member companies. And I think we at OIA, through the Sustainability Working Group, have really demonstrated that it doesn't have to be that way, that we can actually serve in a leadership role, and help support our leading members who really proactively began convening, pre-competitively in this really unique way, with all of our different competitor member brands sitting on the phone and gathering in face-to-face meetings together and putting aside competitive differences to decide what best practices should be, and then articulating those and, using OIA to help advance those best practices and really spread them more broadly. So, I think it's just a really good example of the power that a trade association can have to really make change and make positive change rather than thinking to that lowest common denominator.
I love that. That's beautifully said. Thank you, Beth. Want to, sort of veer off here a little bit. And so within the Sustainability Working Group, there's several different working groups, right?
That's correct. Yeah, and so when we began partnering with the Sustainable Apparel Coalition on the, what was originally called the Eco Index, which is now called the HIG Index, this broader overarching sort of sustainability measurement platform, they really brought some of the scale and the, really frankly, the financial backing to be able to take the index and really build it out and make it something that could be scaled more broadly throughout the global apparel and footwear industry. And so when that partnership began to evolve, it allowed us within the Outdoor Industry Association Sustainability Working Group to really focus on more specific topics, things like chemicals management issues and animal welfare issues in the supply chains of down and wool and leather and other materials that are commonly used in the outdoor industry, making sure that the animals are treated well, where those materials are coming from. Looking at this issue of microfibers, so small plastic fibers that are shedding off of your polyester clothing when you wash it, and frankly are shedding off your natural fiber clothing as well. And so all of these different specific issues we've really been able to dive into more deeply. And Jessie actually runs our chemicals management program, which was really the first sort of specific issue that we dove into after being able to step back a bit from really leading the Eco Index development. And so I think Jessie can probably provide a bit more color on some of the issues within the chemicals management work that are part of the Sustainability Working Group.
Yeah, I can happily speak a little bit more about the chemicals management side. What's interesting is I feel like it did serve as kind of an incubator for the concept because it was a particular focus for the industry to rally around. And then since then, other working groups, like as Beth mentioned and you mentioned, have formed, like microfibers, animal welfare, different things like that. But within the chemicals management, we've narrowed in even further to very specific processes that are known to be chemically intensive and where brands need more education around what alternatives are, what are safer, better chemistry that they can ask for from their suppliers. So in particular, and I won't get too in the weeds on it, but we have a durable water repellents group.
Okay.
And that focuses on the performance chemistry that essentially is applied to your outdoor jackets. It protects your rain jacket, your down jacket from getting wet and soaking and penetrating into the fabric. There have been a few issues kind of within that chemistry. So brands have learned from education, from academia, of toxicity of those chemicals in the manufacturing process. And so, again, brands within the outdoor industry are inherently interested in protecting the environment and protecting workers within their supply chain. And so they want to be armed with options that are safer. And so that's kind of our role, is to talk amongst the industry around what other commercial options can we provide and kind of transition to together.
Yeah.
And another side chemistry that we're also focused on are flame retardants, which are actually, commonly in a lot of products we all use every day, furniture, sometimes, fire, I guess I would say firefighting foam. That's actually the most
Yeah.
popular use, but it's also found on outdoor tents. And so
Oh, cool.
that's something we've been looking at is just assessing, how important it is to have chemistry, but also making sure that it doesn't have unintended consequences like creating hazards or negative toxic, health impacts. So we're essentially looking at that and again, just trying to arm brands with education about what are safer alternatives out there and what kind of processes can they use to transition to a safer chemistry in their supply chain.
Can you give a specific example of that? Is that something you're allowed to share? Is that a secret sauce that you can't give away?
I can touch on it a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Again, without going too much into it, but flame retardants in particular is interesting because the history of flame retardant regulation is kind of a strange one where there was regulatory, and I'm no expert, so we actually hire somebody to kind of help lead the regulatory and policy side of this, and I kind of support with the facilitation of the group. So my history isn't up to snuff as his might be, but essentially there was regulations added in the 1970s and 1980s to that required flame retardants to be added to canvas tents, which made sense because there are huge events, and obviously with a lot of people inside, there's a huge danger there. So there was a regulation that was enacted at the state level, and since then, of course, we've pioneered so many other materials for outdoor tents, backpacking tents that make them extremely light and robust, and we want those tents to be safe too, but all of those regulations for the canvas tents were then applied to these backpacking tents and camping tents. And what we have since found is in not all cases do the flame retardant chemicals actually suppress a fire. The point is for them to slow down a flame. If for whatever reason, you're at a campfire and all of a sudden this ember falls on your tent, you don't want it to just explode. That's obviously something that wouldn't happen, but the purpose of the flame retardants was to slow a flame in hopes that it would provide a more safe experience.
Okay.
But we've found that in most cases it doesn't actually impact the reaction of the flame. It doesn't necessarily slow a fire that might be happening.
Right.
There's still a lot of information we need to get in terms of testing data, but what we have found, and a lot of testing has been done, that what perhaps is more dangerous actually is the toxicity of the chemical.
Right.
So when you're putting up your tent, you're actually ingesting it through your skin by even just putting up your tent, sleeping in your tent, and things like that. So we're trying to understand the balance of, how can we protect consumers and, ensure that they're using their products safely in terms of possible danger like fire, but at the same time not adding all this, unneeded chemistry that actually might be creating more of a toxic environment. Yeah. So that's a pretty in-depth, example of that, but that's something that outdoor brands are looking at, and, we want to open up that dialogue together and kind of dig in.
Yeah, well, and I guess I didn't realize that well, first of all, that the flame retardant was needed to be on any backpacking or camping tent, right? I knew about it being on a canvas tent and for, larger tents like that, but I had no idea. And so I guess flame retardant clothing, right?
Yeah.
Is that something you guys work on?
We don't too much, just because on a regulatory level, it's usually children's clothing that it's required, but, and we don't often, there's not a lot of outdoor clothing for infants, for instance. And so, but I do know there are a lot of consumer groups that are focused on that because, again, like infants are really susceptible to chemicals in particular as their system's developing. And so it makes it very important for somebody to be looking at what kind of chemistry are we requiring and what are the trade-offs if we require this kind of chemistry. And so it's a similar mindset that we're kind of analyzing the choices that have been made and trying to influence better ones in the future.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. Stay with us. We'll be right back here on Connect and Collaborate. We have Beth Jensen, Director of Outdoor Industry Association, the Sustainability Working Group. Sustainability Business Innovation is what she is the director of. And we also have Jessie Curry with us, who is the manager of chemicals management within the Sustainability Working Group. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to Connect and Collaborate. I am Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and I have with me today Beth Jensen, Senior Director of Sustainable Business Innovation for Outdoor Industry Association, the Sustainability Working Group. And I also have with me Jessie Curry, who is a part of the Sustainable Business Innovation. She is a manager there, specifically within the Chemicals Management Working Group. So we just took off. We were talking about flame retardant chemicals, right, on your tents and potentially on your clothes, right, for youngsters. And these chemicals are, well, they're chemicals, right? And that brings up a connotation for a lot of people, I believe. And I always think of a classroom, right, and things exploding and liquids and all the things. But these are definitely chemicals that we have to put on our clothing. They're required on tents, right? There's some regulations out there that require that. So I'm going to dig a little bit deeper here on this chemicals management working group. Take it away for me, Jessie.
Yeah, I would add, it's interesting what makes the outdoor industry kind of a leader in this space is the products that the outdoor industry makes requires high performance. Right. So if you're going to be hiking and a storm all of a sudden comes, you're going to need that protection. So it's really important to have performance chemistry that takes care of you as the consumer, as the wearer, and you know, is again taking care of your health and safety for a number of situations. But what's interesting is that, you know, whether it's the outdoor industry, the fashion industry, the electronic industry, anybody that's making products is using chemistry. Our whole world is made of chemistry, and I think that's what's really interesting is because the word, you know, does sound a little scary and intimidating because you can't quite see it. You can't see it, and so it's really hard to grasp. But I think it's important to remember that you know, we rely on chemistry for everything in our lives, really. Right. But what needs to happen, though, is a really precautionary approach for, is this chemistry appropriate for the use? Is it safe for the end user? What's the hazard level that's going to be, you know, what kind of hazard is the user going to experience? And so there's just a bunch of balance and trade-offs that have to be assessed. So that's really the goal and the main function of this chemicals management group is to assess all of those things together. And as Beth mentioned earlier, the reason that we are kind of united in that effort is because most of our supply chain are shared amongst brands. And so you'll have, you know, what you might consider competitor brands actually making their product within the same building, within the same contractor. And so if one brand makes a switch of a chemistry, it could impact the other. Or if one wants to make a change, it might be easier to make a change if they have, you know, 5 brands coming together and say, we would like to make this change together and invest in that change in your factory. And so it's really important for the brands to be kind of aligned in their ask. And it makes it a lot more effective for their supply chain and the supply partners that they work with.
Absolutely. I would imagine it would cut down the price too, right? The cost overall if they're collaborating.
Yeah, yep, exactly. And that goes that's the same for innovation also. We hadn't touched on this, but we had our first kind of innovation session at Outdoor Retailer this last January, and it was Beth actually led this, and it was a great chance for the industry to say and see, you know, who was pioneering in different innovative chemistries and materials, and then it really gave the brands a chance to kind of come together and say, you know, who would we like to fund or support or look into further as an individual brand, or maybe later down the road collectively. So innovation and sustainability definitely need those collaborative efforts.
Absolutely. One of the other working groups I wanted to touch on here was the microfibers, right? We mentioned it a little bit, but this one seems very interesting to me. Beth, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little more in-depth on the microfibers working group.
Yeah, of course. So this is an issue that has really come out in the context of the broader, you know, ocean plastics, microplastics issues, and you know, it's really come out more widespread across various media outlets and so forth, and in the research community in the last several years, I would say in particular. So essentially, the concept here is that all textiles and apparel are shedding tiny fibers into the oceans and waterways when they're washed. And whether that's washing the fabric, the big bolts of fabric at the beginning of the production process of the garment, or whether that's, some sort of industrial washing process, like if you're cleaning a carpet, like industrial carpet cleaners, fibers are coming off of carpets in that stage, or whether it's consumers washing their clothes, whether by hand or in a front load or a top load washing machine. All fabrics and apparel are shedding these tiny fibers. Now, polyester is being specifically targeted on this, I think, by many outside groups because polyester is essentially plastic. And especially if you look at, some of our member companies in the outdoor industry have been real pioneers at using recycled PET or recycled plastic water bottles to make fabric, which is really a good thing. But the other side of this that we're now seeing is that, again, like anything, those tiny fibers are being shed off into the oceans and waterways. Now, I do need to stress that the outdoor industry is really only one small, we are a contributor, but we're just one small piece of this puzzle, in the context of the broader apparel industry, which includes, fashion brands and global sporting goods brands and so forth. And then really just the broader textile industry in general. People don't often think about just the massive amounts of textiles that are used in carpets and home textiles and so forth. And so all of these different product categories are contributing to this issue, not just outdoor fleeces, for example. But that said, our industry and our group in particular have really been a leader in trying to really understand what are the key data gaps here, because there are a lot. We don't know right now how or why different fabrics or fibers are shedding, and that's what really the crux of what we're trying to accelerate in terms of research as quickly as possible. I mean, I think the biggest challenge right now is that as you're developing products, you have to have standardized test methods to test different aspects of the products. And right now, we don't have a standardized test method to test for shed rates of different fabrics. So right now, there's no consistent way for brands to know which fabrics are shedding less or what different criteria impacted the way that they were shedding. Is it, the way that they were washed? Is it the construction of the garment? Is it the construction of the fabric? Is it the age of the fabric or the garment? All of these things contribute to how much it's shedding. And so we're really trying to get data as quickly as possible on all of that so that we can equip our product designers and developers, specifically in the outdoor industry, but really in the broader fashion industry, to make more informed decisions about the fabrics that they're choosing for their products, and choosing those fabrics that shed as little as possible or ideally not at all. So this has been a really interesting issue to work on with our collective group. And again, as I said, the outdoor industry has really emerged as a leader in this area, even within the broader global apparel industry, I would say. And, we helped convene a summit of key stakeholders on this issue in Santa Barbara last October, in Santa Barbara, California, which was co-sponsored by a nonprofit called the Ocean Conservancy, as well as the University of California, Santa Barbara Brun School, School of Environment and Management, which has been really active in working on this topic as well. And then the consultancy Future 500 was the impartial moderator on it. But essentially it gathered about 40 of the real global key stakeholders in this issue. And we emerged from that with a roadmap for both academia and research community, as well as the global industry community, and really talking about our key collaborative next steps within both of those key stakeholder groups. So that roadmap is publicly available on the OIA sustainability website now, along with all of our other tools and resources that we've developed on the microfibers issue, as well as all the other issues we've been talking about here today. So we'd encourage everyone to look at that. It's outdoorindustry.org /sustainable-business, I believe, but you can get to it from the the main outdoorindustry.org landing page quite easily as well.
Fantastic. So, are you guys looking at being the forerunners of creating the scale of sorts for the microfiber shedding?
We're participating. We have industry members who are participating actively in the process. So the thing is, those standardized test methods are run by specific standards bodies that are internationally or nationally recognized, that essentially manage the wide breadth of standards on all different products that are produced across the world today. So the two that we're mainly working with are a group called ASTM, which does a number of other standards that we use in the outdoor industry, as well as just product standards more broadly. But if you think about, there has to be a standard for if you're claiming a backpack is a 30-liter backpack, for example, there has to be a standard that companies have to follow in terms of how do you make sure that a backpack is actually a 30-liter backpack, not 29, not 31, but a 30-liter backpack. And that's just one example. How do you ensure that a camping tent is up to specification in terms of wind resistance so that it doesn't shred apart, in a 60-mile-per-hour windstorm when you're out camping? All of those different product attributes have standardized test methods that our members have to adhere to. And so this group called ASTM is one of the key American test method bodies, and we're working with them. We have industry members who are working with them closely on what we would call a dry test method for microfiber shedding, so looking at abrasion. And so when you're rubbing a fabric, for example, or a fabric is, a backpack strap is rubbing against your jacket or something like that, how are fibers perhaps getting into the environment that way. And then there's a group called AATCC here in America as well, called the American Association of Textile Chemists and Colorists. And they basically own many of the what we call wet test methodologies, so test methods that occur in washing textiles and apparel and so forth. And so we're working with them. We have industry members who are working with AATCC on development as quickly as possible of a test method for measurement of microfiber shedding in different washing processes. So we're working with those two bodies in America, and then we're also coordinating with our sister companies and our sister trade association in Europe called the European Outdoor Group, as they're looking at developing test methods as well to make sure that all of the test methods are aligned in both Europe and North America.
That is awesome. And again, I just want to reiterate that the sustainability here, we're looking across the board, right? It's not just making sure your clothes are sustainable. It is the sustainable working environment throughout the process of making on these clothes. I just have to ask, would you consider moving into other sectors besides the outdoor industry? I feel like I know I have a uniform that I wear forever, and it is polyester, and it was miserable in the summertime to wear, right? And also, it's not great for the environment, particularly if they're not using recycled materials to make those, right? Any thoughts on moving outside of the outdoor industry?
Well, two things I'll say on that. Hey, I love the outdoor industry. I'm an outdoor enthusiast by nature, and so and I love the people that we work with. I feel so fortunate every day to come to work and really be surrounded by this group of amazing industry experts around the world, really, who are really passionate about using business for good and trying to address these very complicated issues. And on that note, too, I would just add that I want to be careful that listeners don't start to peg one material or one type of product as good or bad. Everything has trade-offs. So one of the key points that we have to make in the microfiber discussion, for example, is it's okay, you've got people who are looking at this simplistically and saying, okay, I'm going to get rid of all polyester in my wardrobe because it's shedding microfibers. Okay, well, then you look at cotton, for example, and if your issue is water use, cotton is one of the worst crops in the world in terms of water use. So if you're in a drought-stricken area, you look at India, where so much of our cotton that is used in our apparel here in the U.S. is produced. India has major water shortage issues in many areas, and so that's not always a great a great trade-off either. It's maybe not necessarily an equal trade-off or something better, perhaps, and then you look at materials like down or wool, for example, and there are all kinds of impacts associated with those materials as well, everything from animal welfare, as we mentioned earlier, and really making sure that the animals are treated well in the supply chain, but also grazing issues, for example, in the case of wool and overgrazing and ensuring that our landscapes are protected for years to come and not overgrazed, which is a problem in many areas of the world where sheep are raised as well. And so it just you get to the point where you're sort of like, well, I guess all I can wear is a fig leaf, and that's fine. But we just want to make sure that people really understand and do their due diligence before painting one specific material or one specific product or chemistry even as bad, because everything has impacts, everything has nuances and trade-offs, and that's what makes this area of work so complex. But that's also what makes it so fascinating, and why I again feel so fortunate to be surrounded every day by players in this industry who really have this intrinsic desire to produce products with the least amount of impacts as possible, and really understand these trade-offs, get data to understand these trade-offs, and really lead the global apparel industry and really the global consumer products industry, frankly, in implementing best practices in the supply chain. And that's, I guess, one other thing I'll add as well is we really want to encourage listeners and everybody to think of sustainability not as sort of an add-on attribute. We actually wish we didn't have to use the word sustainability because it has such a loaded connotation, I think, for a lot of people. But I think, the wrong way to think about it is, I'm going to make a green line of product that has, all these recycled materials or whatever the case may be. We really want to encourage people to think about sustainability as just best business practices and best practices that are incorporated throughout your business and throughout your operational practices. And that's what our leading companies in the outdoor industry are really taking to heart, and that's one of the reasons I think that they've been really leading in this area for 10 plus years now.
Fantastic, yeah.
And if I could just add to that, actually, I think that's really the goal of the Sustainability Working Group is to encourage continuous improvement. And so, as Beth mentioned, sustainability isn't this kind of just green line of product that you decide to market, and that's the only reason. It's this holistic idea of let's look at our entire supply chain, let's look at all of our business practices that we impact, whether we do it ourselves or we're mandating through our supply chain. And let's continuously improve those to benefit the workers and the people that are affected through the environment. So I like to think of it as a philosophy of doing better continually, and that's more efficient, and it's also just being safer with the decisions you make.
Right, absolutely. I would love to see this working elsewhere. In other industries for sure, because there's a lot I think that we don't realize all around us that's made, right? And how it gets to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually on that note, and Beth can, she's been director of this group for so long, she could speak to this more in depth, but that's kind of the beauty of the Sustainability Working Group actually, is that we don't restrict it to just individuals in the outdoor industry.
Right.
So we have, individuals, professionals from other industries like, food and health or cosmetic and beauty industries, the automotive industry. A lot of those production processes are very similar, and especially how we source chemistry, for instance.
Right.
And so it's really important that we open up our doors for collaboration outside of our industry, and we see that happen pretty often through this collaborative group.
Awesome.
So we'll see how it trickles out into space, but
that is fantastic to know. I love that. So you guys mentioned it here in the break. I'm going to let you take it away on this, but you're launching a sustainability benchmarking. Is that correct?
A report.
Sustainability benchmarking report. Yeah,
Yes.
That's right. So this summer, and we're working on gathering all the data and assembling the report right now. But this summer at the Outdoor Retailer Summer Market Trade Show, which is now in Denver, and it will be in Denver in July of 2018, late July, we'll be launching our first ever really detailed sustainability benchmarking report for the outdoor industry. And we're really excited about it. It'll finally provide us with a baseline on practices and performance around these different types of attributes we've been talking about over the last few minutes here. And so we encourage everyone to take a look at that. Certainly our meetings and the trade show are really for the industry. Specifically, it's an industry-focused trade show, and our meetings, of course, are closed to industry members only. But that the report will be made public, and so we'll be excited to launch that in the summer and get folks to take a look at that and really start to raise the profile of all of this leadership that the outdoor industry has really demonstrated over the last, again, 10 plus years. And really through this groundbreaking model of working together as competitors to establish best practices in the supply chain and establish these tools. And, one other just sort of interesting anecdote that really shocked me when I started working more directly in the supply chain and starting in this industry around 2008, 9, 10, is the number of different suppliers that are required to make a single product. So I think you walk into an REI store and you see backpacks or jackets on a rack, and you think either you don't really think about where they came from, or you think maybe they were made in a factory somewhere overseas and then shipped over here. Well, the reality is each of those products is made in many different factories. So you've got the fabric being woven in one factory, dyed in another factory, cut and sewn in another factory, and then you've got all the different trims and the different zippers and different components of the products. One of the best examples we give of this is one REI half dome tent. And we have a slide that's publicly used from REI on this, requires 80 different supplier nodes to make that one tent. So 80 different suppliers are involved in the manufacture of that one tent, and that's a fairly simple product, actually, by outdoor industry standards. So that's just something to keep in mind that most folks really outside the industry aren't aware of, is just how complicated and interconnected the supply chains are. And this is the case across the entire apparel industry and outdoor gear. All consumer products really have these interconnected sort of supply webs of manufacturers and suppliers that are involved in making an individual product. So it's just really important. That is what has really elevated the importance of industry members, industry brands coming together, putting aside their competitive nature to come together and establish these best practices, because no one company can do it alone. When you've got 10 different brands using the same factory to sew a product together, which is very often the case, one brand going in and asking one set of questions and another brand going in and asking a slightly different set of questions is very inefficient and does not lead to scaled change for the factories. So the brands really recognized that they did need to come together and establish these consistent best practices in order to make real scale change in the supply chain where again, they're all using the same suppliers and many different suppliers. So that's just one other sort of anecdote that I think is important to recognize in terms of the context of why it's been so groundbreaking that the industry has been able to come together and really lead on this collaborative model. And we're looking forward to finally being able to tangibly measure the impact that this group has had, starting with this benchmarking report this summer.
That is fantastic. I love everything that you've got going on here. We have 30 seconds. Any last thoughts or last words you'd like to get out to the audience today?
Oh, man. Yeah. I mean, I guess I would just say any outdoor enthusiasts, recognize that the outdoor industry in particular is really leading the way on sustainability initiatives. And for more information, again, definitely visit outdoorindustry.org if you want to see really who the companies are that are involved and are kind of leading these collaborative efforts. We have a list of our members on the website, and encourage you to look there to find out more. And we're based right here in Boulder, Colorado, so it's really groundbreaking work that's happening based right here.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure having you on today, Beth, and you as well, Jesse. And have a great day. We will see you tomorrow. Hello,